The tantalizing prospect of a truce between Israel and Hamas is still alive. Both sides agree in principle to the proposal, but there are conditions from both sides, ones which could ultimately make or break the deal. Who'll blink first? Will they even blink at all? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. Ceasefire is a term most of us are fairly familiar with. The word hudna, though, is perhaps a little more ambiguous. In Arabic, it translates literally into truce, but in the current climate of Middle East conflict, it's come to refer to pretty much any attempt at stopping the regional fighting long enough to make some progress. That is currently in the hands of Egypt, which is trying to mediate some sort of hudna between Israel and Hamas. That, of course, would go a long way to assisting the US President George Bush's goal of peace and a viable Palestinian state by the end of his final year in office. Bush touched down in Tel Aviv on Wednesday, coinciding with those growing Egyptian efforts to negotiate peace between Israel and Hamas. Omar Suleiman, Egypt's intelligence chief, is heading up the talks. He was also in Israel this week, trying to find a way through one of the major sticking points, that, of course, the release of the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit, who's been held by Hamas since June of 2006.
We hope that with this package which we are working, that we will make indirect negotiation between the Israelis and the people who are abducting Gilad Shalit to release him, to make a new atmosphere for continuing the negotiation for two-state solution.
But on the flip side of the equation, Hamas refuses to make Shalit part of any truce.
This is as a separate entity. The prisoner exchange is totally different from the ceasefire condition. This is a file and this is a second file.
All right, let's get into it now. Let's introduce our guests. In Cairo, Ezzeddin Shokri, who is a former advisor to the Egyptian Foreign Ministry. In Ramallah in the West Bank, Hassan Khatib, a lecturer of cultural studies at Birzeit University. And finally, in Tel Aviv, MORDECHAI KEDAR, he is a researcher at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies at Bar Ilan University. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on Inside Story. I'm going to start in Tel Aviv with MORDECHAI KEDAR. I want to start with some absolute basics with you. When there is talk of a ceasefire with Hamas, when this issue raises itself, is it taken seriously in Israel when Hamas comes up with the idea of a ceasefire?
The question which we raise always is, what is the ceasefire leading to? If the ceasefire is going to lead to negotiations between Israel and Hamas, and hopefully peace between Israel and Hamas, this is one thing. The other thing is, if this ceasefire is going to enable Hamas smuggle more ammunition and more arms and get better in brackets for the next round, this is nothing which we would agree upon. So since Hamas do not even see a possibility to have peace with Israel, because according to Hamas, we have to go away from this region. Israel has no right to exist in any piece of this country. So what is the peace? What is the ceasefire for?
Let me put that to Hassan Khatib in Ramallah. The point is there that the Hamas in Gaza don't even want the Israelis in the area. Do you think they are serious about ceasefires when they bring this into the public domain?
I don't think the Israelis and the Palestinians in Gaza are serious about ceasefire, simply because ceasefire between Gaza and Israel is practically impossible, because Gaza-Israel relation is part of Palestinian-Israeli relations, and it is very, very difficult and impossible to separate the relations of Israel with the West Bank from the relations of Israel with Gaza. I think that the Israeli practices in the West Bank will ultimately prevent any possible agreement between the two sides. Second, I think that there are also regional factors that influences certain parties in this conflict, Israeli-Palestinian, and I think that these factors will continue to encourage continuous confrontations between the two sides. And finally, I don't see that Israel has enough motives in order to go for this ceasefire because of the Israeli fears that we just heard of a possible preparations that might be happening in Gaza for the next round. That's why either we reach comprehensive peaceful arrangements between the Israelis and the Palestinians in general, or any partial arrangements like the one between Israel and Gaza will not work at all.
It's so interesting that when the two of you explain it as you do, it does sound so simple. Unfortunately, on paper, it isn't. Ezzeddin Shokri in Cairo, what can you tell us about the actual progress with this Egyptian brokered deal? Is it being seriously considered, to your understanding?
I think it is being seriously considered. At least this is what I hear from the people I talk to, and also it is apparent from the statements made both by Palestinians and Israelis. I agree with Hassan about the difficulty of a ceasefire. However, nothing is impossible in this region. This is the Middle East. So everything can be done at one point or another if we can get the conditions together. A ceasefire is very difficult for the reasons he explained, but it's important and necessary. And it can be done. It is difficult to maintain it for a long time if there is no political process, if the ceasefire is not linked immediately after in some kind of a political process or another, especially a Palestinian reconciliation. But it is important in itself because a ceasefire between the Palestinian factions in Gaza and Israel will offer everybody the atmosphere that we need in order to do this reconciliation and so on. This is why us in International Crisis Group, we've been calling for a ceasefire on the ground between the two sides as soon as possible, and I'm glad that Egypt is doing this right now.
But before you can even look at political process, or even before you can look at ceasefire, is there not an inherent issue of trust here, and that the two sides do not trust each other to really get a proper peace deal going? How do you broker peace between two sides like that?
Well, there is no trust to start with between Hamas on one side and Israel on the other. But this is why you need a broker that both sides trust. And then you need to get credible and verifiable commitments by both sides. It is not very difficult to verify a ceasefire. You don't launch rockets, you don't launch attacks. If you do this for 2 weeks, again, even if you do this as on an experimental 2 weeks, that's good enough, and then you can move from there. But then once you get the ceasefire, you need to find something else to anchor the ceasefire in. And as Ghassan Khatib said, you cannot deal with Gaza without the West Bank. So you have to link the two back together, and this is where an internal Palestinian reconciliation comes in. It is important to sustain a ceasefire.
MORDECHAI KEDAR in Tel Aviv, I'd like to bring you in again at this point and discuss an issue which I brought up at the start of the program, and that is the issue of the captured Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit. Now, Israel is insisting on his release, not to in any way take away from the significance of his capture, but why is the fate of one man so important in this ceasefire?
We do care about life of people, unlike Hamas. They couldn't care less about their people, because if they cared about the Gaza people, they would take care of their electricity and fuel and water and jobs and livelihood. But all these people in Hamas know nothing about this. They are just a group of gangs who know nothing but the jihad. And this is the tragedy of the Palestinians, that these Zoran, these Shabab are leading them. They know nothing about statehood. They know nothing about diplomacy. They know nothing about economics. They know nothing about infrastructure, health, education, nothing. All they know is to launch missiles and to shoot mortars and to kidnap people. And this is why they are keeping doing this, because this is the only thing which they know. And they blame Israel for the situation. And this is the tragedy of the people of Gaza. Look, we got out of Gaza more than 2 years ago, and we thought that this place can turn into heaven. They have a gas field in the sea right next to Gaza. Why don't they take this gas and start selling gas to all the world? They would be richer than Qatar if they did it. Why don't they produce milk for babies instead of producing those missiles?
Okay,
what do they think, that they will free Palestine?
I'm going to interrupt you,
and
because
this is the problem.
It is.
They have no vision.
I want to bring it back to this idea about Gilad Shalit there, and actually put it to Hassan Khatib in Ramallah. I realise you're, of course, in the West Bank, not in Gaza. However, could you give us your thoughts, perhaps, on what Hamas thinks it's doing by holding on to Gilad Shalit for almost 2 years now? What is it actually achieving? Is it giving it leverage?
Definitely, having Shalit in the hands of Hamas is a very significant asset from the point of view of Hamas within the confrontation that has been going on between Hamas and Israel. First, this is a reason why many significant parties, countries, personalities in the world are approaching Hamas leadership in order to deal with them on this issue, which is very important in terms of the position of Hamas. Second, this is a bargaining chip that Hamas is using. And third, and finally, this capture of this Israeli soldier strengthen and empowers Hamas and strengthen its public position. The problem is that Israel is always mixing the cause and the effect. Hamas is not the cause of what is happening in Gaza, and the proof to that is that before Hamas dominance in Gaza or in the West Bank, there was a different leadership that was serious about building a state, that was serious about building infrastructure, about education, about peace. But unfortunately, it wasn't given a chance by the Israelis, who, instead of giving up the occupation in return for peace, doubled the size of settlements in the Palestinian occupied territories, especially in the West Bank. The Palestinians are not primarily after milk and whatever other necessary important needs for life. They are primarily seeking liberty, freedom, self-determination, end of occupation, independence. This is the factor that motivates the Palestinians more than anything else. And when the Palestinians, in terms of public opinion, realized that Israel is not serious in giving up its occupation in return for peace during the 90s, but rather interested in the peace process as a coverage for the expansion of settlements and consolidating of occupation, they unfortunately turned away from supporting the peace camp, which was undermined, and came to support the only other alternative in the Palestinian politics, which is Hamas. So Israel is responsible. The failure of the peace process is responsible for the change, for the shift in the Palestinian public opinion.
Gentlemen, stay with us. We're going to take a short break here on Inside Story. When we come back, violence is already there, but will we see more of it if Egypt's led efforts collapse? Back in a moment.